Today, we dive into the ever changing quarterback landscape. We talk tiers. We talk strategy, which quarterbacks we're willing to tier up off of, tier down off of, which ones we're avoiding, all of that and more to dominate your Dynasty Fantasy Football League. Welcome into the Dino Construction Podcast. I'm your host, Justin, joined as always by David and JP. We're excited to continue our tier series. Last week we did wide receivers. This week we are diving into the ever important position of quarterback, especially because we're always playing Superflex. How have you guys enjoyed diving into redoing our tiers? It's been an interesting experience for me.
Kind of a challenge.
Yeah, I know. I agree. It was hard to sort out. I mean, there's been so much that's changed within the top 10 quarterbacks specifically.
And then it's only a quarter of the season, so how much do you weigh that in the grand scape of, Dynasty? A lot, apparently.
Yeah, I mean, in our Know When to Rebuild episode, I talked about relax a lot. But then when we're talking about our quarterback tiers, I'm finding myself being a little reactive here. That's the thing is, right? You want to react quicker than the market because otherwise you can't capitalize on value changes. So I think it's a really good opportunity to talk about which quarterbacks' value changes we want to react quicker than the market on and which ones we want to play it safe on. And I think tier one is an interesting place to start that conversation. JP, can you go ahead and define what we are considering as those true tier one quarterbacks?
Yeah, we're looking for those quarterbacks that we expect to be top 5 fantasy quarterbacks this season and also project that for the next 4+ years or so with no questions about job security in the near future.
And David, go ahead and read our tier one quarterbacks for us here.
Tier 1, we have Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, and Jaden Daniels. A little bit different than last time, guys. We think Jaden Daniels is already in there. I mean, obviously we do, but I guess someone want to give me the pro case for moving him up into tier 1 like we have?
Well, I mean, in our hot take video over the summer, my hot take was he was going to be the quarterback one overall on the season. My lukewarm take was he was going to be, I think it was a top 8 quarterback, and I pretty much guaranteed he was going to be a QB1 in Dynasty or in redraft. He has incredible rushing upside. He's been a well above average passer as well, which we, of course, didn't count on. So when you count in the fact that he has been a solid passing quarterback, a guy that he's going to get chance after chance after chance because he's shown so much already. Like he has that job security. He's got a second contract pretty much. Honestly, at this point, I'd be willing to, if I could place money on that he gets a second contract with the Commanders, I'd take that bet. Like I feel like it's pretty much locked up just based on what he's done so far, the potential that he's shown.
Yeah, I would say that the odds are greater than 50% that he does get a second contract with them. He has looked really good. I will say to start the year, he's had a really, really easy schedule. His strength of schedule has been really weak, which has been good for him. And also, I saw it was the first few weeks that his first read target share was really, really high. Like Cliff Kingsbury was parents telling him, like, you're going to go right there. So there are some things I'm just a little bit concerned about. I mean, he's been phenomenal, though. Don't hear that I'm just crapping on Jaden Daniels. I was teetering on the edge of him being on my tier 1 versus tier 2. I end up having him in tier 2, but I still value him over every other quarterback in the next tier. But there's just some things that, I don't know, the run game in Washington has been fantastic. It's just a quarter of the way through the season, so I'm just being a little bit patient. I still think he's a top 3 or 4 dynasty quarterback for sure. I just was a little bit hesitant to put him in tier 1 just because, like I said, I think it's greater than 50% that he has the second contract, but I'm not quite at like 90, 100% range yet.
Well, I mean, that's the difference between you and me. I'm willing to make those tough calls for our listeners here, JP. When you have a guy with this rushing floor, I mean, it's just, especially I think later on, you're going to be knocking a quarterback based on age later on in this episode. This guy who is so much younger than pretty much everybody else that we are talking about in the first 2 tiers, with the exception of really just like one player, essentially.
I mean, he is pretty old. He was completing passes to Brandon Ayuk in college, so
Oh, yeah, he's not that young, is he?
Yeah, he's still young.
It's not like he's a baby. Obviously, Caleb Williams is a bit younger than he is. Anthony Richardson, but with those few exceptions, this guy is a bit younger. I mean, Joe Burrow was old coming out of college. Herbert's now on a second contract. Stroud, I guess, is very young, but doesn't have the rushing upside. So
Right.
who else is in this age range with this rushing upside that actually has shown that they can hang in the NFL?
Yeah, I mean, the only other guy really would be Lamar, who is older, obviously, but we have him in this tier now, and that's because he's been the QB1 so far, and he's just been incredible. And David, how confident do you feel in Lamar being in this tier and just with how we've seen guys like Cam Newton and these Russian quarterbacks start to decline sometimes when they approach that age 30-ish?
Yeah, I'd honestly want to look into that a little more to see if there's data that suggests when he might fall off the cliff. I kind of wonder if there's a case for maybe him as the 101 in startups right now.
Yeah.
The way he's playing is just so consistent. He's been so consistent throughout his career, at least when healthy. He is the fantasy cheat code when he's on, and he's kind of been that this year. Allen's definitely done that a little more often, a little more recently, but we have more questions about his weapons, and I think his weapons impact him more than Lamar's weapons impact him. Lamar's also a year younger, if I remember correctly. So I don't know. It was kind of tough for me between those two, to be honest, to who I was going to put at 101. So I'm pretty confident in Lamar up there. I might even have him as the highest player overall, to be honest.
And JP, changing the subject back to Jaden Daniels, I do just want to ask you, came to mind here, if we had seen the same production during the first 5 games from Anthony Richardson as we'd seen from Daniels, would you have Anthony Richardson in tier 1?
I mean, I probably would have him as a top 5 quarterback, but tier 1 just with the long-term job security, probably not. And I mean, that's a good call though, since I like Anthony Richardson, but just tier 1, it's hard for me to break into that one. But honestly, I don't blame you guys at all for having him there. You guys, I'm just been a little bit hesitant on him specifically.
I'm excited to ask you some what you would pay to tier up to Jaden Daniels questions in the next tier. I feel like this one is one everyone kind of knows is elite with the exception of Daniels, which I think we can hit on in tier 2 a little bit more.
And just, you want to expand a little on what we're looking for in tier 2?
Yeah, absolutely. In tier 2, we expect these guys to be QB1s, not necessarily top 5 like we kind of expect for tier 1 for the next 5+ years. We're again not sure about that elite ceiling, at least on a yearly basis. We don't expect them every year to be elite, even though we think they could definitely peak in that top 5. And JP, who is in this tier?
So we got a faller here in Patrick Mahomes, and we have CJ Stroud, Jalen Hurts, Kyler Murray, Joe Burrow, Jordan Love, and Caleb Williams. We got a pretty big tier here in tier 2. And I want to talk about these pocket quarterbacks specifically. When looking at Patrick Mahomes, CJ Stroud, Joe Burrow, and Jordan Love, I really don't think there's much difference in what these guys are providing you like for this season and probably next. And I mean, they can all have huge weeks on a week-to-week basis, but they're all relying on passing touchdowns from a week-to-week basis because they don't have that rushing floor and upside. But how much more do you tend to value one guy to the next? I mean, is there one guy that you value a lot higher than those four? Because I have them all very similar in my perspective, in my dynasty outlook.
Yeah, I mean, look, we have them all in the same tier for a reason, right? They do have very similar production. They have enough athleticism in today's NFL. They're not going to hurt you as far as rushing goes. I mean, Burrow just had what, a 40-something yard touchdown run as we started recording, basically. I think you could even probably put Caleb in there. He's, again, athletic, but is he really going to make an impact with his legs? Probably not. Like you said, I'm not sure there's much of a difference between them. Maybe Mahomes just with the name value and the longevity of his job security, but are any of these guys really, at risk for losing their job anytime soon? Probably not. I think if I got a reasonable plus to go any direction, I would go that direction.
Yeah, how I differentiate between these guys at this point is primarily just what does the market tell me? Like, not that I'm willing to pay more than one for another, but in a startup draft, I would take first the one that I think is a better trade chip. The guy that I think I could tear down for and acquire assets for. Like, if I know that going into next offseason, Mahomes finishes strong or Burrow finishes strong and they're the QB4 in Dynasty, or Stroud, that's probably the guy I'm taking 4th overall, and then seeing if I can tear down from them to the guy at the bottom of this tier, or tearing from that draft slot down, right? I do think they're pretty much interchangeable. And even going off of that, the rushing upside that we've seen from Hurts post tush push success so far this season, in 6-point passing touchdown, he is QB 11 in points per game. Granted, that's behind a couple guys that haven't played a lot of games, like Joe Flacco, although he's played a few, and Jordan Love in this tier as well. So if you take those two guys out, QB 9 in points per game, but it's not that elite difference making, right? It's that kind of back end QB1 we expect from the passing guys. So I think this tier is pretty murky. And so there's only really 2 big questions I have. The first question I have for you two guys is there anybody in this tier that you would take over Patrick Mahomes who...
Yes, that'd be CJ Stroud for me because I don't think this year, next year that Mahomes, that I would project him out higher than CJ Stroud. And Stroud is 6 years younger. I think Nico Collins is phenomenal. Tank Dell's a good wide receiver too. So yeah, I would take Stroud right now over Mahomes.
I can't really blame you there. And it's kind of a cop out, but I don't like 1-for-1 trades at the same position. So if someone offered me any of these guys for my Mahomes straight up
In a startup, sir. In a startup.
in in a startup, yeah, I'd probably take a few of these guys over Mahomes. Stroud, I mean, I think you can make a reasonable case for any one of these guys above any of the other one of these guys, though. This tier is just so tight. You're pretty happy to stay within it, I think.
And my second question is putting your money where your mouth is with having Caleb Williams in this tier. Are you taking, let's start with the top. Just stop me if you would take Caleb Williams in a second over Mahomes, Stroud.
Maybe. I think it depends on where I'm at for any of these, to be honest with you. If I'm rebuilding, yeah, I would take Caleb in a second
Over Mahomes?
over any of them. I think that's the price to move within this tier, to be honest. Maybe you can get a little bit more, but
Stroud and Mahomes, I probably wouldn't, but the other guys, I think I would.
I mean, 2 weeks ago in a league, in a start 10, I managed to finagle turning Kyler Murray coming off a big week, Caleb Williams coming off a down week, into Caleb Williams and Drake London.
And London was coming off a poor start at that point as well.
He was, yeah, for a little bit of context there. But personally, I do think that I need a little bit more than a second to go from the top of this tier. And I think for this type of a tier, I think I probably would take any of these players over Williams in a second in a vacuum, just because I think I could do more with the player than I could with Williams and a second.
I guess my follow up to that would be, did you have Caleb in this tier in your own personal rankings?
I do, but I have him at the very bottom of the tier. I think that in this type of elite quarterback talks, the difference is less than a first, but I think that within these tiers, the difference can be a little bit more than a second to move between these types of tier ranges.
I think that's actually a really good exercise for tier videos. But what is your price to move within this tier? The drop dead that no matter what, who you're going from or to, the plus is enough to get you to move. Is it 2 seconds?
2 seconds, I'm absolutely willing to do.
Oh, yeah.
And I think anybody else besides Williams is probably a single second at this point. I just view him like a little bit below the rest, but almost like in a tier between here and tier 3.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty bullish on Caleb Williams. I'm looking right now. The first 2 weeks and 6 point, he had 7 points and 7 points. We know he started out slow, but after that, he had 21 points, 13, 27, 36. So I mean, over the last 4 weeks, I mean, he's got to be a top 5 fantasy quarterback. And for the number 1 overall pick, he just seems like he's getting better and better every single week. So I value him pretty firmly in this tier. I wouldn't necessarily say he's the last one, but I mean, I could say he's near that, but I would take him in a second over everybody except for Mahomes and Stroud, I think, at this point.
All right, I guess I'm a little slower coming around. How the turntables have, JP.
Right.
And moving on to a little bit murkier of a tier 3. David, can you define what we are looking for in this tier? Good luck.
Yeah, I think this is actually a great time to point out that your tiers need to be fluid, which means what goes into each tier also needs to be fluid. It also means comparing tier to tier with someone else is kind of difficult. Typically in our tier 3, at least especially in our summer video, this was a lot of upside players here. In this iteration, it's kind of guys that have lost value, some guys maybe at their ceiling. Definitely still some upside here, but it's not what I would typically envision as our third tier. And Justin, you want to go ahead and read off these names for us?
It's a sad day when even I have Justin Herbert in tier 3, followed by Anthony Richardson, Dak Prescott, Drake May, and Brock Purdy. And within this tier here, we've had a lot of discussions in our Discord chat when we were doing our show sheets. JP, do you want to start us off with the one that almost broke up the podcast this time?
Well, it's about Dak Prescott here, and I was saying that I think he belongs in the 4th tier. And I mean, when you're looking at these names, specifically what kind of jumps out is that he's clearly the oldest guy here, and he's not really a rushing quarterback. I was kind of thinking that Jared Goff, I just think that who we have in the next tier, spoiler alert, is I just think I see them very similarly because Dak Prescott he's 2 years older, and I don't think that he really has the upside that he did have. Now, last year he had a great season. It was the best one total points wise that he's had in his career, and points per game is a little bit different. But man, I just think coming into next offseason when he's coming into his 32-year-old season and he's not coming off of a top 5 quarterback season, but I don't think he will personally. Then I just think that he's just a depreciating asset that's just going to keep dropping year after year, which I know right now he's a pretty good contending piece, and he might be the best contending piece in this tier outside of maybe Purdy, who I think is also really good. He's been great this season. I just think that he sticks out like a sore thumb with the age point with stacked up against these guys.
I think I'd argue the main difference is his upside. I know he doesn't offer a ton as a rusher anymore, but he's still QB3 last year. He's a back end QB1 this year. At least going into the week, he was QB9 and barely outside of the top 5 of QBs.
Yeah, now he's going to be
Especially
dropping that for sure. But
probably a little bit, yeah. But I mean, that's part of the thing about doing these with a quarter of a season of data is, like I said at the top, how much should it really impact your tiers? But look, as far as when it comes to Goff, Dak's top 3 seasons are all better than Goff's top season. You have to go back to 2018 for a year when Goff had more points per game than Dak. I think the upside is different enough that the 2-year difference doesn't mean much to me there. I would much prefer Dak on a competing team.
And QB age is an interesting thing, right? JP, you brought up this concern about the QB age cliff for a rushing quarterback, but we've seen, and especially like with the way that medical sciences are improving, the way these players take care of themselves improves, especially someone who's getting paid 60 plus million a year. I think they're going to be able to afford to take care of themselves physically. Like 32 is the new 28 from, a decade plus ago, right? Like we see these guys playing till 40. We see Aaron Rodgers going in his 40s. We saw Tom Brady going in his 40s. We saw some people, really fall off near the end, but I don't think we expect that fall off to be before like 36, 37, 38. And if you're telling me I can get 4 or 5 more years of, somewhere between a mid-range to back-end QB1 out of Dak, which I think is a reasonable expectation at what I expect to be a 2 firsts or less price point at this point in this tier 3 kind of, which I think is like, we'll talk a little bit more in a second. I'll ask you guys about that, but I think it's a great deal for. Of course, he's going to depreciate in value, but I want to win championships. Like if I'm rebuilding, I'm trying to move him. But in any other situation,
yeah, I
broken
mean,
ball.
I guess what I would argue is if he's a back end quarterback 1, he's more that replacement level where if you get a Geno or a Darnold or somebody in that range that they're really not providing that much of a difference, and they're not going to be they don't have that value point where they're going to keep depreciating from maybe a round 3 starter pick every year, another round or 2. But I definitely understand that on a contending team, he's pretty appealing, although he can be inconsistent for sure without that rushing upside.
I mean, but his floor is not
He's
that
had
much
5
of a
points.
difference maker. His floor on a season is not that much of a difference maker. People have dud weeks. If you'd like to overreact in Dynasty fantasy football to a single week, JP, you're more than welcome to. However, if you look across his seasons for the last few seasons, he has been consistently a difference maker with the exception of the broken ankle year, which he was a difference maker for that. We see in the last 5 years, we see a 2 and a 3 in the final positional rankings when he was healthy all year. We see one season where he wasn't healthy all season. This one, he obviously just fell from QB9 a little bit, but this man has shown, and on that rushing point, like 240 rushing yards isn't nothing. That's about 2 points a game, give or take, that he's also adding on the ground. Plus, he has 1 or 2 touchdowns a year. So he's approaching almost 3 points a game on the ground, which is not nothing. There are quarterbacks who truly give you nothing. So I just kind of really want to push back on that one because I think he is a real target on a contending team at the quarterback position.
I was gonna say, I just want to add to that real quick, Justin, kind of piggybacking on your points. If you take out the broken ankle year where he was averaging something silly like 27 points per game, 6 of his 8 seasons, he's been a QB1 in total points. So I think it's pretty consistent production that you're paying for there.
Yeah, I've always loved drafting Dak because I mean he was getting you like 6 rushing touchdowns a year, and the rushing numbers were pretty good. I just think that those are going to start to drop off, every single year now that he's 31, which last year, like you said, 200 yards is pretty solid. But I mean, even in like best ball, we saw he was drafted as like around QB10 and then a redraft. I just think that we don't expect him to be that top 5 quarterback. I just think that last year he just was a little bit better than expected. And we're talking total fantasy points for these finishes, points per game. He's going to be lower than there's guys like Lamar that miss a few games or whatnot too. But
coming back at you about the elite difference maker, I'm pulling up here on dynastydaddy.com, and you can kind of see down here on the season before today. So Dak Prescott in a 6-point passing touchdown is still considered, this is projecting out what would be elite historically in wins over replacement. This season, as that back end quarterback 1 QB9 that he was projecting, is still at what's considered an elite difference maker level along the lines of a Drake London at wide receiver 8, a Jordan Mason, Mike Evans type of player. So I do think that we do see from him as well
I mean, he's right on that fringe of starter, and he just had a really bad week too. So he's kind of on that fringe, I guess, maybe if we're meeting in the middle.
Well, can't wait to be right at the end of the season. Moving on to Anthony Richardson, though. This is a guy I've been kind of lower on throughout with the start of the season that he's had. What's the vibe check? Vibe check real quick, JP.
Yeah, I think his value has gone down. I mean, we knew he was super inexperienced, so I'm not just completely jumping ship, but I think you do have to push him down in your rankings a little bit. But I mean, pretty much everything before the season mostly stands about how he should get better as the season goes along with more starts. At least that's the hope, right? But yeah, not feeling as good as you did 5 or 6 weeks ago with Anthony Richardson.
And I kind of want to do a price check after the vibe check. Are you paying 2 firsts for Anthony Richardson?
What kind of first we talking here?
Random. Could go either way at this point.
Probably not quite.
Let's just go down the board in this tier. Are you paying 2 random firsts for Justin Herbert?
This is a tough tier for 2 random firsts. I think it's very situationally dependent.
Yeah.
If I have them to spare and I don't think they're going to be high firsts, I need a quarterback. Yeah, something in there is a no. Then I mean, it's tough, right?
Brock Purdy.
I can't personally.
I can. Yeah. I could.
Dak Prescott.
You know the answer.
That one really depends on if I'm competing.
Drake May.
I might.
I think he might be the one I'm closest to paying 2 firsts for in this tier.
It's because of the upside, right?
Of course.
And JP, I know you wanted to talk a little bit about what you saw in that upside in his game today. What are some of the things you saw that you found to be really promising from Drake May?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of what I liked about him as a prospect, but just with the way that he's able to hit the deep balls down the field. He plays aggressive and he'll run around a lot, actually. I mean, his scramble rate coming out of college was actually pretty darn high. It was just really overshadowed by Jaden Daniels having one of the highest scramble rates we've seen in a while. So, and he just had 3 touchdowns. It took Caleb Williams, Bo Nix, Jaden Daniels. It took them a couple of games to throw the first touchdown pass. He threw 3 in his first start. Mind you, he did sit for 5 weeks, so he had a little bit more practice time. But I mean, we know the situation there's not great either. The offensive line's not great. The weapons aren't great. But he still had a pretty good showing. So, I mean, I think his value's rising a little bit after that first game. Don't you agree?
I only have one share, so I'm not incredibly invested, but I was watching that whole game excited. I was very disappointed early on, and then seeing him kind of like seem to hit his stride as the game went on, get those 3 touchdowns in. I definitely have to say, like, that's more than I expected, and I'm ecstatic for that one share that I do have. I have him and Jaden Daniels there. I think out of these guys, I think there's 2 guys that I think have a legitimate chance to rise back to tier 2, and he's definitely a rise up to tier 2 in this situation, not back. And May is definitely one. David, would you pick him as the one you think is most likely to rise to tier 2 out of this tier?
Drake May, I think at least soonest, yes. I think Richardson has a chance. I think Herbert has a chance next year if they fix his weapon situation. But yeah, I think if May puts together a couple of good games in a row, especially, even if they're back in QB1 or high end QB2, even if they're, in that range, I think the perception of him will change to the point where we at least have to consider it. Yeah.
And the last guy I want to just briefly touch on here, Justin Herbert. I mean, he has the same name as me, so he's got to be cool, first of all. Second of all, yeah, he has had a disappointing season from a fantasy standpoint. Today was his best passing yardage output, but he still was not a good fantasy start, only scoring 15.68 points with 237 passing yards, 1 touchdown.
Yeah, and Brock Purdy, I mean, we haven't talked about him a lot, but he's been really good this year. He was a top 5 quarterback before this past week, but he just had 30 points. So he's going to probably be a top 3 or 4 quarterback, at least where it sits now. So on a contending team, I'd be really happy to have him.
JP, you said you're willing to pay 2 firsts for Purdy. He's one I have struggled to put up into that point, but I definitely understand what you're saying there. I think this could be a blind spot for David and I. David, last week in our wide receiver episode, you were talking about that process issue of really struggling to let players ascend past your initial expectations. I think I struggle with that too a little bit. Do you think we're sleeping on Purdy here?
I was gonna say yes, and then I just pulled up his finishes. He was QB6 last year. He's QB5 right now. That is someone I might have a blind spot on. I accept that. I
Please just say, and I quote, "I don't care." I will respect you so much.
I mean, I almost don't, but like the fact that he's propped up by his weapons does impact things, but should it from a fantasy perspective? We know a lot of them are going to be around a while. We expect Shanahan to be calling his offense for a long time. I mean, maybe there's a point there to me being lower than I should on Purdy.
Yeah, I mean, Debo's missed some games too. I mean, even in this stretch as well. And Ayuk started out really slow without much practice time. So, yeah, I just think that he's a little bit undervalued amongst, some people.
Yeah, I have to be honest that if he finishes top 6, 7 at the position again, even lower than he did last year at 7, even 8 in this range that is still like that elite warp difference maker I was kind of pulling up on that Dynasty Daddy chart earlier.
Yeah.
I don't think I can keep him out of tier 2 next year, and I don't see any reason why he shouldn't with the weapons he has. So, JP, I think you, even though we had Purdy as a guy we weren't really going to discuss too much, I think you might be really bringing up the point that he's probably definitely knocking on tier 2's door. He might even be the most likely guy to rise out of this tier, to be honest, after this short conversation here for me.
Do we need to see Purdy get the extension for that?
He'll get it.
It's going to be quite the raise from $800,000 a year to $60 million.
That's something where I'd rather get ahead of it because I'm pretty darn confident he's going to get it.
Coming back to the conversation at the start of the episode about those market trends that we want to get ahead of, we know people overreact to contract extensions. So if you do have that confidence, there's risk, right? That's why you might be able to get Purdy for 2 firsts right now. When if he had the extension that the other guys have, that Love, Prescott, Herbert, Murray, Hurts, Mahomes, Burrow all have, I think he probably would be in tier 2 already.
I mean, the Trevor Lawrence, Jared Goff contract, fully expect that to come for Purdy, honestly.
I think it might be more like, I mean, why shouldn't he reset the market?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think this is a possible buy right now that I didn't really identify to this conversation. So JP, thanks for challenging my process as always, sharpening my mind here a little bit. Now I'm going to put you to work a little bit defining our 4th tier of quarterbacks.
This is quite the collection here that we have. Yeah, I mean, these are quarterbacks that are safe-ish producers or rookies that carry, some moderate risk. This tier is a group that, for the most part, has pretty good market value and they have potential to rise, at least a tier if they continue to be really good. There's some guys that are interesting, but Dave, why don't you go ahead and read us this tier?
Yeah, sure. Start off with Jared Goff and Trevor Lawrence, Baker Mayfield, Bo Nix, JJ McCarthy, Tua Tagovailoa, and Sam Darnold. Pretty big tier, kind of diverse. JP, you want to start us off with some discussion about those Vikings quarterbacks?
Yeah, I mean, based on what Sam Darnold has done, I have 2 takeaways, right? The first one is when it comes to offensive play callers behind the great Sean McVay, Andy Reid, Kyle Shanahan offensive minds, I think Kevin O'Connell might be one of the next best ones. I mean, what he's done with Darnold makes me really, really bullish on JJ McCarthy next year, which, I mean, he's probably going to be the starter, we think. But if Sam Darnold continues to play at an elite level, maybe not. But Sam Darnold, he deserves credit, though, for sure, for what he's doing in that offense. Definitely. But David, with Darnold as an upcoming free agent, do you think he signs elsewhere to be the starter? And how confident are you in Darnold if he doesn't have Kevin O'Connell, that really strong offensive line, and some of the best pass catchers out there?
Yeah, before I answer any of your questions about the Vikings, I just got to push back a little on your play caller narrative there, leaving out the best one in the league. Matt
Ben
LaFleur,
Johnson?
come on. Yeah, he's pretty good too. Anyways, Kevin O'Connell's a great coach, great offensive mind. I'm not trying to knock him. With Darnold, like you said, we just don't know what next year we're going to bring. If we knew he was the Vikings starter long term, I think there could be a real discussion about whether he belongs in this tier or not. But the fact that he might not have a job next year, I mean, we all think he probably will. With how starved the NFL is at quarterback, he's going to start somewhere. We just don't know where. We don't know what kind of offensive mind will be calling his plays. We don't know what kind of weapons he has. And it's just so far, 4 or 5 games of production. So guys have had good 4-game stretches before and sucked. I think the upside is very real with him, but I'm not quite ready to show the confidence that it would take to put him in that next tier. And with JJ, it's very similar in the sense that if Darnold keeps playing like this, especially if he takes him on a playoff run, how do you move on from him as the Vikings?
Yeah, with the way that defense looks, 13-4, 14-3, and a bye potentially even is not out of the question, right? Even heck, this could be a 17-0 team. I don't, of course, don't expect that, but the odds of them missing the playoffs at this point are very low. And yeah, it's definitely an interesting conversation. We have him listed at the back end of this tier, just the way that he's drawn. Personally, I have him ranked right at the back of this tier as well myself, just because of the uncertainty. So I want to just start a quick little game. I'm just going to ask random first or Darnold, David.
Got to take the first for now. I've been trying to get a first for him. I've even tried a couple 1-2 swaps and haven't had success. I still think market says first for sure there.
Random first or Tua, JP?
Man, that one might be one of the toughest ones. But I think Tua is kind of a buy low. If I think it's going to be a later one, a playoff first, I probably would take Tua, honestly.
Random first or JJ, David? I'm giving you all them Vikings. Didn't even mean to, but it makes me happy.
This depends on the state of my team and specifically my quarterback room. If I can afford to take an upside swing, I'll just stash him. I've got him on a league where I don't really need him. He's on my taxi. If someone offered me a first, I'd have to think about it. But I would need to vet that first. If I thought it could be early, I would take the first. But if it was truly just random, I'd probably stick with McCarthy for now.
Random first or Knicks, JP?
I think that's right about fair. That one's like 50-50 being situational, but since I'm just a little bit lower on Knicks, I think I take the first.
Random first or Mayfield, David?
Yeah, one of the biggest risers in our updated rankings here, up 7 spots, and the rankings 2 in the tiers. The way he's playing, man, if I'm competing and I got a first to spare, I'll spend it on Baker.
Random first or Lawrence, JP?
I'm really curious about what you guys think on this one, but I'm going to stick with Trevor Lawrence for now.
I'll take the first 100%. David, would you over Lawrence? Random first? If you didn't need quarterback, if he's your QB3 or you have someone you can plug in?
So if he's my QB3, sure, I guess. But how many builds do you have him as QB3 right now? Still taking a little time to react for your rosters for those who believed in him a couple of years ago. Yeah, sure. If he's my QB3, I'll take a random first. But if I'm needing him to start, I'd rather keep him unless I know I can go buy better production for that first.
And David, coming back to you because it's the order. Even though I just asked you, I'm just going to ask you 2 questions in a row. I know your voice is probably tired. I apologize, but random first or Goff here?
Look, I think a random first has been the price on Goff since we realized what he is for the Lions there. Just like Baker, if I need him, I'm competing, I've got a first to spare, I would be fine spending it on Goff. If I can avoid that and I can keep the flexibility in my pocket, I'd like to. But yeah, if I need a QB2, I'll pay that for Goff.
All right, so just going through this, the only guy that doesn't seem like the line is a random first is Darnold. So I kind of expected to come up with that, asking you guys all of that. How sure are we that he still belongs in this tier given that? Would you take Darnold in a second over all of these other guys, David?
Probably not.
JP?
I was just going to say, the way he's producing, man, like it's hard to put him in that next tier below, but I get the point you're making, and it's a fair point.
I'm kind of trying to, in the next couple of weeks here, go on a Sam Darnold, even this week potentially go on a Sam Darnold buying spree. He just had a down game in London, which everyone usually has a down game in London because of the time change, etc. Also was a really good matchup, really tough matchup, really good defense against the Jets. Did they play the Jets? That was the Jets, right?
Yeah.
Really tough matchup against the Jets. So I think I'm going to try to buy him for 2 seconds, a late first if I can. I turned down Derrick Henry for Darnold on a team where I have Sam Darnold and I'm competing and I need a running back. I think he's worth about the first. If it's a playoff first, let's say it's a first that is already 6-0 after this week, David, are you willing to pay that potentially for Darnold if you need a quarterback?
I would want to shop around first. Even then, I think I need a little something extra back just because we really have no idea what next year is going to look like.
Yeah, I value Darnold a little bit closer to Kirk Cousins and Geno Smith personally. So I would not pay a first, probably even the 6-0 first for Darnold.
Yeah, and looking at my tiers here, even though I do have him a tier above Cousins and Geno Smith, he's right next to them in rankings, and I think that tier difference is probably not that large. So definitely an interesting one. Let us know what you guys think about Darnold in here. I know we're coming off a little bit wishy-washy on Darnold. That's because he is so uncertain as an asset, killing it producing, but
Another difference between him and the Cousins and Gino we're mentioning is like what, 7, 8 years of age.
yeah, he is young. He's not that far removed. He was the same draft class as Josh Allen, drafted before Josh Allen, correct?
Yeah, he was like the 3rd pick in the draft, I think.
New York Jets know how to pick him.
Well, that's where he's going back to, is the New York Jets.
Can you imagine?
I don't think so.
Yeah, he would never do that. All right, well, moving on to tier 5. Justin, what are you looking for in this 5th tier of quarterback?
So in tier 5, we have some of the safer guys that we just previously talked about, or, well, there's a guy that if he somehow gets a contract extension, is tier 2 in the realm of possibilities. It's not impossible. So either a lot of safety or there is one moonshot here, is more or less how I would sum it up. And JP, who are those guys we got?
Yeah, we got Kirk Cousins, Geno Smith, and Justin Fields. And I want to talk about Geno here quick. We just kind of mentioned him, but I've heard some reputable people talk really high about Geno, talking about how he's played like a top 10 quarterback this year, if not top 15. He had a little bit of a down game against the Niners this past week, but with 1 year left on his deal, it seems like he probably has earned an extension if he continues to play this way throughout the season. But if he does get the extension with the weapons he has and his aggressive downfield play style, is he one of the best budget quarterback twos that you can buy for a contending roster in a 6-point passing touchdown league, Justin?
Yeah, I mean, if I can get him, I'm probably willing to pay 2 seconds, no problem, no question. I'm probably not even that diligent in vetting the seconds, to be honest. If I need a QB2, that's the only thing I need, and it's just plug and play. I have a QB3 behind him, like a Dalton or somebody like that I can just count on for bye weeks. He's probably the first guy, maybe along with Cousins in this tier as well, that I'm going knocking on the door of for the cheap budget option. Actually, maybe Darnold's the first guy. It's Darnold, it's Cousins, it's Smith, kind of this conversation we were just talking about a second ago, or the 2 seconds type of guys I'm trying to get. Assuming you've already shopped around in the tier above, Darnold's not available, Fields is not available. Are you willing to, if you need that quarterback help, pay 2 seconds for a Smith or a Cousins, David?
If I had an injury and I'm going on a championship run, I get an injured quarterback and I need to plug in a starter long term, I think I might be talked into it. I struggled to pull the trigger on slightly more than a second for Cousins this week as a bye week filler, but that's because I don't really need him to start regularly for me. I felt all right about my chances this week without him. So it is dependent. But yeah, if I had a void suddenly at QB2, or maybe I didn't think I was competing, but now I am, and I need a QB2, I think I could be talked into that.
And JP, do you think that's the point as well? That's probably the point of paying for them?
If I did go to that other tier above and didn't have luck, I probably would have to, but I would rather pay a second and maybe like a Jordan Whittington type, kind of a player equivalent to like a late second or so in value if I can do that.
It's cute you think Jordan Whittington is worth a second. I always appreciate your sense of humor, JP.
I mean, with Cooper Cup being older, I think there's at least a little bit of hope for him in the future, but that's not who we're talking about today.
Moving on to tier 6. David, can you define our rough definition of this tier and this iteration of our tiers?
Yeah, obviously it has a lot to do with how the first 5 or so tiers have gone. Typically, we're going to see guys with job security through the season and at least a chance at a job next year. There is this one exception in this group, which I think you'll all notice if you didn't when we got that sneak preview. But mostly just guys that we feel like you can play as your QB2 if you have to for the rest of the year. Definitely a QB3, though. And you want to go ahead and read that tier, Justin?
Absolutely. We have Matthew Stafford, Will Levis, Daniel Jones. How's he doing right now? Not that good. Michael Penix Jr., Aaron Rodgers, Deshaun Watson. Is that the one we were worried about job security? Derek Carr. I'm worried about a lot of these guys' job securities. There's definitely one we obviously know is not starting right now in Penix. Let's start out with him. If you are rebuilding, is he at the top of this tier for you, JP?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, part of it is I'm trying to shed points, and he at least has the upside that if he does take over as a starter, he might be worth a first down the road. And none of these other guys I really see that possibility for.
And quick little follow-up question. David, I think I probably already know your answer. Are you taking a random second over any of these players?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I'll keep it easy there. I would maybe I'll keep Penix on a rebuild, but
Right. Yeah, I think any of these players, they are just a QB3 that you really don't want to start. Just like you said, David, they can be a QB2. But I mean, even Derek Carr, he got off to a hot start, but week 3 he had 9 points, then 8 points, and he followed up with 16 points. So I just want to make sure everybody knew that. I don't know. I feel like the beginning of the season we remember so much more for some players, but he really hasn't been all that great outside of that.
And Will Levis, are we pretty much pulling the plug on him as a project? Is he really just worth what he's going to produce for us in fantasy this year, and that's probably it? Or do you have any interest in buying low on him?
I'm getting out.
yeah, I'm not really trying to buy low on him.
Yeah, I think this is kind of our bye week filler tier. Absolutely. And JP, go ahead and define tier 7 for us real quick then. I won't even show the tier ahead of time this time.
Yeah, it's pretty much just everyone who is left. I mean, they're pretty much they're backups, or they're just kind of spot starters who maybe have some upside for this season as a QB2 if you need it. But David, go ahead and read this gross tier for us.
Yeah, sure. It's Russ Wilson, Bryce Young, Aiden O'Connell, and Spencer Rattler is the human being in that picture there. They did not have his jersey in this tier maker list, so had to improvise. I think. Sorry. We're also missing Andy Dalton. My apologies. I missed him in the graphic.
Sleeping on the Red Rocket. How dare you? Although I just read that they were considering replacing, that there's so much speculation, they had to come out with a report that he's not losing his job to Bryce Young after the 2 interceptions today. So he might only be in tier 7 for a short bit of time more.
Who is at the top of your list? Would it be somebody like Bryce Young, Russell Wilson, or Spencer Rattler? I mean, I think Rattler for me is the most intriguing, but I don't know. I thought he looked pretty good today, and I think he at least has a chance to start next year. I think the same can be said though for Bryce Young and Russell Wilson, that maybe they get a starting job next year, maybe at least to compete.
If I need the points, it's Dalton. If not, then yeah, probably Rattler or Young, just because they're still younger.
Yeah, I would take Rattler or Young at the top of this tier. Probably Rattler, Young, Wilson, Dalton, O'Connell would be the way I would rank it, with the same caveat of David. If I needed a spot start to fill in for my bye week, I would take Andy Dalton next week over any of these guys.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's all there is. Just some hope for some of these guys for next year, but it's not even a certainty for any of those guys.
And just kind of want to own in on a little bit of a price. There is some upside on a Bryce Young or a Rattler. I probably am willing to pay this just because I think it's worth the risk. I'd be willing to drop 2/3 for either of those guys. Would you also, JP, at this point?
I think I might for Rattler, but I don't think I'm at 2 for Bryce right now.
David?
I think a third is probably my price in this tier, unless I'm desperate.
All right, good to know. I might be a little over enthusiastic on the potential upside there. I just expect Young to have the starting job again in about 3 to 4 weeks, at which point, if he goes into the season next year as a starter, money well spent. But God, he's also really bad at football. I should probably go watch some highlights before I send out any trade offers, shouldn't I?
Yeah, he just has such a stink on him. He just seems like a really, really hard asset to move. That's why I'm not sure I'd pay that 2/3. I can understand if he's going to give you starting, somewhat level of production in a bye week.
Well, I think we've about beaten this one to a pulp here. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Data Construction Podcast. We know we really got into it on a couple of these players. We hope this was as useful as it was for us. We even changed our opinions a little bit while talking it out, which is why we do this, right? To refine our process. So thank you for joining us through this journey. Please make sure to like and subscribe to catch our running back and tight end tiers in upcoming weeks. And from all of us here at the Data Construction Podcast, until next time.